Hey, sometime back I did a series of videos on books on world mythology from different regions of the world. I thought I would maybe start a new series of videos, perhaps, on different mythological beings and some of the important myths associated with them. So for the first video, I thought I'd talk about dragons. I've always loved dragons ever since I was a kid. I think what started what started my curiosity about dragons is when I was a little kid growing up in upstate New York. There was this huge backhoe that came into my neighborhood, and I saw this monstrous claw carving up the earth. And at night so that cars wouldn't hit it, they would put flares around it. So, against the backdrop of the night, there was this iron dragon-like thing that was surrounded by flares that looked like they were carried by worshippers. So to this day, backhoes remind me of dragons. Basically, when we talk about dragons in mythology, there's two broad categories of dragons. You have your Eastern dragons and your Western dragons. Now, your Eastern dragons, I'm not going to talk too much about in this video. They deserve their own video. Basically, you've probably seen them. They look like this. Well, they look, here's another one I got from China. Basically, they're benevolent. They represent good luck, good fortune. They represent the rain and water, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But there are many stories that are about them. The Western dragon is a gnarlier kind of creature. It represents chaos, destruction. It represents hoarding. Usually dragons are pictured as hoarding gold and jewelry and treasure and stuff like that, and they kind of look like this. This is a typical Western type of dragon. See, and sometimes they have legs, they have wings. Sometimes they're just serpent-like. There are some people who like to differentiate between the two, but I noticed in these mythological stories, there's a fine line between serpent and dragon. As a matter of fact, in Northern Europe, there's an old word for a dragon called worm, and worms don't have any legs. I'm not going to talk about books in this video, but I am going to talk about just one book. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is taken from, well, there's many books, but a lot of this book actually started me on a lot of stories. This is like a nice little retelling of many stories of dragon myths. It's a book simply called Dragons, and it's put out by Time Life Books, and it's part of a series called The Enchanted Worlds. It was a series that was put out by Theme. This one's on dragons. There was another one on dwarves, another one on wizards and witches. I don't know if Time Life still makes them, but they're really cool. Okay, so to get started, I like to think in Western mythology, there are two categories. There are two subcategories of Western dragons. There you have your cosmic dragons, dragons that are usually fought with, the beings that fight against these cosmic dragons are usually gods. And then you have your second category of dragons, which are smaller. They live in caves and rivers and forests, and they hoard treasure and breathe fire. And these are usually fought with by knights and heroes and saints and whatnot. So to talk about your cosmic dragon first, I'm going to mention the first dragon I mention is Tiamat, and she comes from Babylon. And the Babylonians have a story where there was a being. Well, it doesn't state explicitly that Tiamat is a dragon, but it seems to be implied. She's basically a goddess of the ocean and of salt water, actually, but she's a force of destruction. The gods need to fight her, so they elect a champion by the name of Marduk, and he's a storm god, and he kills Tiamat and cuts her in half, and one part of the body is the heavens, the other part he makes the earth. And well, that's the story in a nutshell. Another story from India is also a cosmic dragon by the name of Vrtra, and he fights another storm god. He represents the thunderbolts, just like Marduk does in Babylon, and his name is Indra. Now, he's the storm god, the rain god, and he used to be worshipped in ancient Egypt, but today he's no longer worshipped much. He's been replaced by Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. But in this ancient story that's told in the Rig Veda, this dragon, he slays this dragon with his thunderbolt, and the dragon releases life-giving water that he was hoarding in his body. So, again, there's this hoarding theme that dragons have. Moving away from that part of the world and going to Egypt, there's another very, very interesting dragon by the name of Apep, also known as Apophis. And Apophis is a dragon that, a type of serpent, a type of dragon that prevents the sun from rising every morning. So what happens is that the sun god Ra is on a boat, a bark, and he sails underneath the earth, and then he rises in the east, and then he sails the celestial Nile to come underneath the earth again. And every morning he has to fight this Apophis creature. And as for his companion, he has Set, a war god, to help him fight this dragon every morning. And every morning he cuts this dragon into pieces, rises in the east, and when he sails again underneath the earth, the dragon is put back together again. He's resurrected, and once again, Apep has to be slain again by Ra and Set. So every time you see the sunrise in the morning, be thankful that once again Ra slew the Apep. They say the magicians and the priests of Egypt actually had clay images of these of Apophis, and they would smash them to give magical support to the work of Ra and Set in slaying Apophis every morning. Interesting. One more cosmic dragon I'm going to mention, and that's from Scandinavia, from Norse mythology, and that's Jormungand, the Midgard serpent. Now, Midgard is basically the realm of humans, and surrounding the whole world is actually the serpent that literally surrounds the world and holds its tail in its mouth. And his main enemy is Thor. Again, the storm god, thunder gods. There's a theme here, and there's various stories of Thor fighting the Midgard serpent. One of them is that he tags along with a giant named Hymir, and they go fishing together. And the giant is really getting scared because Thor is going way out into deep water. And I believe Thor has ox heads as bait, and he ties it to the end of a line. He throws it in the water, and instead of a fish coming up, there's this huge serpent rising. And Thor starts fighting it with his hammer. And just when he's about to give the death bolt, the death blow, Hymir is scared to death, and he cuts the line at the last minute, and the Midgard serpent sinks to the depths rapidly, and Thor is just so angry he slaps Hymir, and Hymir goes falling over the side of the boat, and he's got to wade back to shore. And some say Thor is so angry at the last minute he was able to throw his hammer and kill the Midgard serpent at the last minute, but some say no, he didn't really kill it. The Midgard serpent is still down there, which kind of makes sense because guess who Thor faces at the end of the world battle during Ragnarok? Something you don't see in the movie Thor Ragnarok because, well, that's the comic book Thor, not the mythological Thor. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about cosmic dragons. Moving into more, dragons of the river and the cave and the swamp and the forest as these other dragons. And there's some ancient stories and medieval stories associated with them. We all know the story of Beowulf and the dragon, and I'm not going to get into that story because you've all been tortured enough with it in English. But in ancient literature, there's Heracles. Heracles had to fight various dragons. In one, there's 12 adventures Heracles went on to make him immortal. And the second adventure, he fights this Hydra, this dragon called the Hydra that has 9 heads and lives in a swamp called Lerna. So it's called the Lernaean Hydra. And what he does is Heracles, at first he thinks it's going to be an easy battle. He starts cutting off the heads. But the problem is that every time he cuts off the heads, 2 heads grow back in its place. So Heracles has to think over his strategy, and he goes away and he comes back not only with a weapon but with a torch. And every time he cuts off a head, he cauterizes the wound, and the heads can't grow back, and that's how he kills the Lernaean Hydra. In another story, that's also part of the 12 labors, he has to get these mysterious apples called the golden apples of the garden of the Hesperides, and this garden is attended by beautiful nymphs. And they have a pet dragon. And in one story, he kills the dragon. And you hear about the death of this dragon in the Voyage of Argo by Apollonius that tells the story of Jason and the Argonauts. In part of the adventure of Jason, he comes across these grieving nymphs and these goddesses, and they're crying because this brute came along and killed their dragon. And that's the story of Heracles, and they're referring to that story. But in another story, Heracles does not fight the dragon. He actually gets Atlas, who has access to the apples. He gets Atlas, the titan that's holding up the heavens. He manages to con Atlas into getting the apples for him while he holds while Heracles temporarily holds the heavens on his back. And Atlas thinks he can get away with this and keep Heracles stuck there forever holding up the heavens, but Heracles cheats him into allowing Atlas to hold the heavens up, and he manages to get away with the apples. There's speaking before of Jason, Jason and the Argonauts in the Voyage of Argo have their own battle with a dragon, although this is a little less climactic. Jason has an ace up his sleeve. As his lover, he has Medea, who's a sorceress. So in this story, he simply gets... what happens is that the serpent is guarding the fleece, the golden fleece that Jason wants to get, and he manages to simply get Medea to put the serpent to sleep, and he's able to take the fleece. So that's not really much of a battle story right there. Moving away from ancient Greece and moving into Northern Europe, the Scandinavians have a great story. They have a big hero. In Iceland, they have the Saga of the Volsungs, which tells the story of Sigurd. Sigurd is the great dragon slayer of Norse mythology, and in his version of the story, he's hiding in a hole, and as the dragon comes crawling overhead to drink water, Sigurd simply spears him from underneath with his sword and kills him. This dragon is interesting because he was once a dwarf by the name of Fafnir, but Fafnir had this hoard of treasure, and he wanted to guard it so carefully he transformed into a dragon. Talk about the powers of greed. He becomes a dragon, and his brother Regan, Fafnir's brother Regan, wants the treasure, so he gets Sigurd, the hero, to kill the dragon, and he secretly wants to kill Sigurd and then take the treasure for himself. But what happens is that after Sigurd kills the dragon and takes his heart and cooks it for Regan to eat, he touches the heart to see if it's cooked, and he burns his fingers and puts them in his mouth. And because of the dragon blood, he's suddenly able to understand the language of the birds. And the birds tell him, "Oh, silly Sigurd, this Regan fellow is going to kill you when you're sleeping, and he's going to take your treasure." So Sigurd thanks the birds and kills Regan instead. And then the birds tell him, "Okay, now you killed Regan. Now you could go to this place up on a hill, up on a mountain, and there you can save the beautiful Brunhilde that's surrounded by a wall of fire." And so apparently dragon's blood, if you drink it, you could hallucinate and understand birds. In the southern version of the story, in the Austrian epic, the Song of the Nibelungs, Sigurd is called Siegfried, and there he kills the dragon too. But in this version, instead of tasting its blood, he actually bathes in the blood, and this blood has the ability to harden his skin and make it horny so that he has natural armor. The problem is that he's bathing underneath a linden tree, and a leaf falls and lands on between his shoulder blades. So this is his one vulnerable spot. This reminds you of the story of Achilles when his mother Thetis dips Achilles into the river Styx to make him immortal. The problem is that she holds him by the ankle, and this is the only vulnerable spot Achilles has, and that's how they kill him. Well, that's how they kill Siegfried, unfortunately. People who he thinks are his friends spear him in the back when he least expects it. Bummer. I'm just gonna mention. I don't want this video to get too long. I'm gonna mention one more story, and that's you've all heard of Saint George and the Dragon. Saint George, the patron saint of England, I believe, and he has his own story. And he was a Roman soldier who was Christian, and he's riding along, and he comes across this kingdom where this beautiful. The king's daughter is being sacrificed to an evil dragon, and this is during the time when dragon slaying stories had Christian allegory to it. So in this story, the dragon is evil, and the princess that has to be rescued is sort of the soul being liberated from evil. So Saint George comes along and kills the dragon and marries the princess. And in this, actually, I have an interesting icon here. When I was in Bulgaria, in Eastern Europe, they have a lot of these beautiful plaque-like sculptures that are called icons. If you're Russian, I'm sure you heard many times of icons of saints. Well, St. George has this beautiful icon I found. Oh, this is a cheap version. Don't believe me, I don't have anything expensive like that. This is made for tourists, but it's a beautiful piece of art. There he is with his little cross and a spear, stabbing the dragon. And he's killing it the typical style with the spear going down the throat, and here's the princess being liberated, like the soul being liberated from temptation and evil and stuff like that. Okay, so there are many, many other stories of dragons, but I just thought I'd give you these few, and that's it. So that's it. So until next time.